So before I get started, just a quick admission. I am not a morning person. In fact, you could say I'm violently opposed to the whole time of day. So the idea of like a creative morning is kind of a blasphemy to me. So while I will, stand up here and dance and sing for, the sadistic pleasure of Brandon, I just want it officially noted that I'm opposed to the whole concept of this event. So. All right, with that out of the way, let's see if I can get over to my talk. All right, and I will try not to stand in front of my own talk. So, what am I here to talk to you guys about? I'm going to talk to you about my adventures and my company's adventures in HTML5 and the epic journey that we've gone on. So to get started with that, I will tell you a little bit about myself and the history of my company. So I, over the last 10 plus years, have grown a small company here in Edmonton called G Skinner, and we basically specialize in sort of cutting edge interactive experiences. And we've sort of focused on working with big tech companies and working with whatever their latest platform innovations are. So in the past, this has meant that we've done a lot of Flash work, and we chose Flash because it let us build the type of experiences that we wanted to build, right? It was about the only technology that we could do web-deployed interactive with that let us build really cool, experiences with animation and interaction. And so we did a lot of work with companies like Adobe and their partners, Major League Baseball, CNN, stuff like that. And we got really good at it, and we actually got to the point where I was sort of starting to get bored of it because my company was great at, building these experiences, and they could pretty much do it on their own. And I was kind of getting bored of my job. And about 2 years ago, a couple of things happened. One, Steve Jobs said, Flash sucks, and we should all stop using it. And everyone took that to heart. And unfortunately, Flash kind of took this nosedive. And secondly, we were approached by Microsoft, and Microsoft said, hey, we're really familiar with the work that you guys have done in the Flash space. We're working on IE9, which is going to be the first version of IE that doesn't totally suck, and we want to see what you guys can do on this platform. Specifically, we'd like to see, can you guys build a real casual game on top of HTML and JavaScript? And we were a little reluctant because our previous experiences doing stuff with HTML had been really horrible. In fact, my most senior dev on the last HTML project we did, which was probably 3 years preceding this, threatened to quit if I ever made him do HTML and JavaScript again. But we said, we'll give it a shot. We'll see what we can do. And we wound up building Pirates Love Daisies. And this was end of 2009, early 2010, and it was probably the first real HTML, like web standards-based casual game that was ever deployed. The game itself wasn't anything really, new or innovative. It was sort of a simple tower defense game, but it really showed where the web was going and what was possible on modern standards. So with that under our belt, we kind of doubled down. We, did more work with Microsoft. We started working with Google, and we started building a lot of like tech demos and experiences to show what was possible with modern web standards. And as we did this, we started to identify gaps in the market, things that were really hard to do, things that we wanted to do but were really hard to do just using the sort of native APIs. And we started to build open source libraries. And so what we've really focused on from an open source perspective is a suite of libraries called Create.js. And these really focus on letting us and whoever else uses them build sort of Flash-like content on top of the open web so that we're able to build these experiences, again, using modern technology. I'll bet you're all wondering, what's in that box, right? What's in the box? So Create.js includes 4 different libraries right now. The first one that we built, and we actually built the first version of this for Pirates Love Daisies, is Easel.js. And Easel.js focuses on like 2D graphics. So it mostly targets an API called the Canvas API, which gives us like really high performance graphics on inside of web browsers. We also have Sound.js. Sound on the web is a total mess, and so we've worked to like sort of abstract that out and make it easier to work with. Tween.js, which is targeted around animation, and Preload.js, because once you have pretty graphics and sound and stuff like that, you need to preload those assets before you can start playing a game or showing someone an experience. We've worked really hard to get the community involved, including a number of big players. So right now we have sort of 3 major sponsors plus us. So Adobe is like our primary sponsor, and we also have Microsoft, and actually just yesterday AOL joined as our 3rd sponsor. And we're really excited about this, not just from the perspective that it gives us some financial resources to like continue to expand the libraries, but it like gives us the backing of a creative tools company, a browser company, and a content company who are all feeding us back input on how to make these libraries better and promoting it to sort of different parts of the industry. But as we started working with this, we found that it really empowered our developers, and they could like build cool content and write great code around the libraries. But to us, that's only half of the story, right? You can't build great experiences with only developers involved. You need to figure out how to get designers involved. So we started building tools as well. And the first tool that we built was a tool called Zoe. And Zoe is really simple. Basically what it does is it takes Flash output, so it takes SWIFTs, and it generates out sprite sheets. So just a single image with a whole bunch of animation frames, sort of in a grid format that you can play back as animations, right? Play them back frame by frame. And this is kind of the like basis of most games out there, right? Most of the characters and stuff like that are sprite sheet animations. And so this meant that we could retain our existing workflows with Flash, which obviously is an application that a lot of animators are really familiar with, but get the output in a format that we could use in HTML5. But this was still more limited than what we really wanted. This is sort of like a stopgap to us. What we really wanted was the ability to like preserve this Flash output. So we wanted to be able to preserve the vectors and preserve runtime animations, even have things like actions and sounds on the timeline work. And that way our designers could work exactly how they wanted, and we could get much smaller output, right? We could get a vector output, and it would be scalable, and it would be runtime manipulatable. Is that a word? I don't know. But and so as an experiment, I started working on a custom extension to Flash Pro that would basically take any Flash content and export it out to Create.js. Basically write a bunch of JavaScript for you. And I built this a little over a year ago, actually on a vacation, which my wife wasn't really excited about. And I got a proof of concept working, and we've been working with Adobe for a really long time, and I had a meeting with them a little later on, and I showed them this, and they said, wow, like, can we work with you on this? And so we wound up partnering with them, and this has become sort of an official part of Flash Pro. We've been working on it for about a year, and now you're able to take most Flash content, push a button, and have that content work inside of HTML. And for us, that's a really big deal because it really empowers our designers to be like full partners in the process of getting stuff onto the web. I'm not going to show you guys a lot of demos during this talk, but afterwards, if you guys want, I can like actually show you some of this stuff in action, including like the games or the tools or whatever you're interested in. So, we built a bunch of experiences. We've contributed very heavily now to the open source world, and we've been building a bunch of tools. So you could say that Microsoft and Steve Jobs basically said, drink this Kool-Aid, and we did, right? We really gulped it down, and I don't regret it. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been really exciting. And part of the reason for that is that things are just changing ridiculously rapidly. We are very much in a web renaissance, right? We are seeing this huge increase in interest in the web as a platform. We're seeing a huge amount of involvement, all of these new companies getting involved, people getting really excited, and just a ridiculous pace of change, right? Things are changing ridiculously quickly. You look at the last 5 years of the web, and everything has changed, right? We're seeing new devices, new interactions. So we're seeing web content not just on the internet, which that's the best internet icon I could come up with, but we're also seeing it show up on mobile phones as desktop applications. So I'm not talking about you can see web content on mobile phones and you can see web content on desktops. I'm talking on mobile phones we can do things like PhoneGap, which lets us create native applications using the web as a platform. On desktops, we're seeing Windows 8, which makes HTML applications full citizens on the OS, right? So we're seeing companies adopt HTML not just as a web technology, but as sort of a universal UI layer. We're also seeing projects like Intel's Tizen, which basically takes HTML and brings it to the embedded market, so you can start building, or will be able to build things like car dashboards and stuff like that. Again, using HTML as this universal platform where we can build UI everywhere. And to me, that's super exciting. It means that I can learn one technology and I can take my content wherever I want to. And as a way of seeing how quickly this has changed, this is a graph that just came out a couple days ago. Kleiner Perkins, Caulfield, and Byers. They did a talk and they showed this graph, and this is the 10 years preceding 2007, right? This is all we had to worry about as web developers is PCs and Macs. And over the last 5 years, we've seen this explosive growth in the device market. These are web-enabled devices where now over half the people who have access to the internet are accessing it via device, not via a desktop or a PC. And this is pretty crazy, right? It means that we need to rethink all kinds of things. We need to rethink how people are interacting. And so with the introduction of these devices, we're also seeing all kinds of new browsers. We're seeing new platforms. So again, as I was talking about, things like HTML as a desktop application development environment. And we're seeing tons of new APIs. So again, to illustrate this, this is the web leading up to 2007, right? So we're seeing, the occasional introduction of a browser. We're seeing, the odd API getting introduced, not really being used. Most of these things didn't actually catch on very much during this time period. And then we hit 2007, and things just go crazy, right? And this is just a very high-level view. There's all kinds of other APIs that aren't even on this, but we can see, the introduction of the iPhone, the introduction of Chrome, Netscape dying off, Android coming in, just so much innovation. And you look at the version numbers of these browsers and how they're just coming out on a constant basis now instead of a new version every couple of years. And it's crazy. Like, it's just an insane time to be working in this space. And we're seeing, we're getting all these new weapons, right? We're getting all these new tools that we can use to build cool content. Tons of new APIs. It's almost impossible to keep up with everything that's happening on the web today. You basically have to choose a little pile of APIs that you're really interested in and keep your eye on them and play with them and wait for them to be ready for actual deployment. I mean, this is just a few of the ones that I'm personally keeping an eye on. I think out of these, touch is probably the biggest thing, obviously, because we're having to as interactive designers and developers, we're having to completely rethink how people engage with our content. Microsoft has been pushing this idea of touch first. And when they first told us about it, I was like, it's marketing drivel, whatever. And as we started working on one of the more recent projects we did with them, and they kept pushing this idea of touch first, it dawned on me partway through that it's actually a great way of thinking of things, because as designers and developers, we're super familiar with how our tool of choice works, right? With how a desktop works, with a mouse and keyboard, and we just kind of naturally design for that paradigm. But if we design first for touch and force ourselves into that world, then we'll get that part right, and then it's super easy to make sure that we get the desktop right, because we're just going to be designing for that automatically. So besides the sort of official stuff, there's also been sort of an untold number of new open source projects, right? And these open source projects are basically making the web usable, right? I mean, making web development bearable. I can't imagine developing for the web without using open source, right? Whether it's jQuery, our own Create.js, things like Backbone. I mean, they fill gaps, they bring new functionality, they smooth things across different browsers. And this space has just been really explosive as well, as it tries to keep up with all of these new sort of official developments with the web. So all of these pieces are kind of coming together to empower us as interaction designers to build new experiences. And one of our most recent projects was the Atari Arcade. So this is a project that Microsoft and Atari came to us and they said, we want to build an online arcade that showcases web versions of our retro games. And originally the idea was rebuild these retro games exactly as they were back in the 80s. And we said, well, that's not really very fun. Like, those games aren't actually that exciting anymore. And it's kind of telling the wrong story to say, look, the web is finally where desktop computing was 25 years ago. So we pitched the idea of like rebuilding these games and really leveraging web technologies and doing things like multiplayer and sprucing up the graphics and adding better sound and stuff like that. And they ultimately approved that. And we also built this kind of neat arcade around it using CSS 3D so that we have much more tactile experience, full touch control. And this is really neat. I'm happy to show this to you guys after sort of the main talk. But this is a great experience for us. And one of the things that was fun about it was that we didn't just get to build this as a web experience, we got to take it to other platforms. Some of them kind of unorthodox. So Microsoft actually built arcade cabinets. And so there's a version of this experience. Actually, I shouldn't say a version. This experience runs on the arcade cabinets as well. And we had to think, how are these games going to work with joysticks? And we had to make sure that these games worked with tablets. So for example, Microsoft's new Surface and like the Samsung Windows 8 tablets and stuff like that. And again, engineering for touch as well as a great desktop experience and making sure that we were performant across all of these devices. More recently, we went in and built this out so that it would work with mobile. And we really had to think about this. Right now, responsive design is this huge buzzword. And when we gave it some thought, we realized being responsive in sort of the traditional fashion wasn't the right approach for this. And instead, we built out mobile sniffer, like a sniffer that told us whether or not they were on a mobile device, and we served them a different site that was really optimized for mobile devices. The thing that was kind of awesome is mobile has gotten so powerful now that we really didn't have to redo the games at all. We made little tweaks to the games to make them more playable on a mobile device, but we really didn't have to do anything to make them perform well on mobile devices. It was mostly around building the interface that would let people interact well on a small screen. So these became very, this is very app-like now, right? We're building web experiences. They're getting closer and closer to looking like a native app. And this raises the sort of obvious question of, well, what about apps versus HTML? Like, what decision should I make when I'm choosing a technology? And this has become a really sort of hot topic subject recently, partly because of statements made by Mark Zuckerberg, who recently said that HTML5 was the biggest strategic mistake that Facebook had made. And, you know, you look at this picture of Mark Zuckerberg, and he's, you know, rich, and he's smug, and he's smart, and he's bashing my technology stack of choice. And so he gets the curly brace mustache of shame. And but that's not all he said, right? That's what the media focused on because it made a great story to say, oh, HTML is dead, long live HTML. He also said we have more people using mobile web Facebook than iOS or Android apps combined. And so maybe he's not such a bad guy. Maybe we can get rid of the mustache. And maybe we can start thinking about, well, maybe it's web and apps, right? Maybe we can't just have one or the other. Maybe we need both. I mean, if Facebook has more people using Facebook through the web on devices than it does through apps, then we probably are always going to need some kind of web presence. We probably can't just rely on an experience through an app. But that's not where he stopped. He also said, it's not that HTML5 is bad, I'm actually long-term really excited about it, right? So, are we good, Mark? We're good, all right. This is my PowerPoint magic that I'm so proud of. This is actually the first PowerPoint deck I ever put together, so I resisted sparkles, but I could not resist this. And actually, I shouldn't pick on Mark because Facebook is a client of ours, and he's actually, you know, I have a lot of respect for what he's done, especially since he signs our checks. But, well, he probably personally doesn't do that. But, so despite what the media has spun it as, you know, even Facebook isn't against HTML5 at all. They're just saying HTML5 isn't the best solution for Facebook right now. And that's totally fair. It probably isn't. But the thing that we need to remember is that Facebook has 600 engineers. They have billions of dollars in revenue. Their entire business model is in putting the best possible experience in front of their users to access Facebook content. They have a lot of resources to do that with. And so for Facebook, you know, Facebook's resources and Facebook's priorities are probably different than us, right? Or at least my clients. I mean, well, some of our clients maybe have these resources, but not most of them. And especially stuff that I build for my own company, you know, we don't have 600 engineers. So what we have to do is think about, you know, what works for us. And so maybe there is room for apps with HTML. Maybe we can build on things like PhoneGap, and we can leverage our existing properties, you know, our existing web content, and we can build stuff that's going to work across a lot of different platforms without having to re-engineer for every single one of them. Well, you know, we have to think about that. We have to think about, do we want to give a best-of-breed iOS experience? Because we're never going to do that with HTML5 and PhoneGap. But we can give a pretty good experience, and it might be good enough, especially if we can get a web application and an Android application and a Windows Phone 8 application essentially for free once we have one of those versions working. We can also take stuff to Windows 8. You know, Windows 8 has a app store, and it means that and HTML is a native way of building applications for Windows 8, and so it means that we can re-leverage content or build things specifically for Windows 8 using the technologies that we know. So when Windows 8 was about to come out, we looked at Pirates Love Daisies and we were like, hey, you know, we have this game. We haven't really done anything with it for a couple of years. Why don't we look at making it into a Windows 8 application and see if we can actually monetize this? And so we went back in, we cleaned a few things up. We spent a day or two actually making it Windows 8 ready. And then we spent a little bit of time adding some monetization strategies to it. So we added some advertisements to a few of the screens. We also added some paid content. So we added some new maps and stuff like that people could do in-app purchases on. And, you know, it's not making us rich by any sense, but it was a fairly small investment, and it's now generating an ongoing revenue for us. And, you know, Windows 8 is brand new, so we're kind of excited to see, like, what happens when this huge bulk of Windows 7 users starts upgrading either intentionally or just through buying new hardware. And so that's the thing that's really exciting about HTML5 is that it just has this immense market, right? I mean, obviously the entire web is a market for this content, right? 2.4 billion internet users. We can also target iOS via PhoneGap or Android also via PhoneGap. 196 and 345 million users respectively. And then right now there's 690 million people on Windows 7, all of whom could upgrade to Windows 8. And a lot of whom will just sort of automatically upgrade as they start buying new hardware. Microsoft is throwing around the number of 400 million Windows 8 users in a year. And so this is also a huge market that we can address with the same property that we're using for mobile and for the internet. So, I think we really are in a renaissance. You can't deny that. Things are just moving so incredibly quickly. And this poses all kinds of challenges, and there's lots of ways that we can address these challenges, either by building open source, contributing to open source, building new tools, rethinking our workflows. There's lots of stuff that's not solved, but that people are working on. This is what happens when you have a slide format that you try and force yourself into, is you have to figure out what to put in both spaces. So, but innovation always leads opportunity, right? You always see a gap between new technology coming out and people learning how to monetize or take advantage of that new technology. And there's been so much innovation over the last few years that I think there's going to be a huge explosion of opportunity and people building cool stuff on this technology stack, because right now we're starting to see the sort of propagation limits or propagation levels of this first wave of modern web standards become acceptable to develop commercial properties on top of, right? I think IE and Windows XP are sort of the main holdouts right now that are holding the web back, and we're seeing that basically drop off a cliff right now. So there's a lot of opportunity here. So, I guess the point of this whole talk is to try and inspire you to get out there and build cool shit, right? I mean, to me, that's what this is all about. That's why I love my job and I love this industry, is that stuff is constantly changing and there's constantly opportunities to build cool shit. It's not so much about getting rich, it's about just having that opportunity to form a new substance. It's like, as a sculptor, if you had new clay coming out every other week, to me that's just a really exciting place to be. So that's sort of my formal talk, so thank you very much. And this is my contact info if you want to get a hold of me.
We'll jump right into questions and then I'll just wrap up. Just fire away and I'll let Grant sort of take charge of where this goes.
Yes.
Questions for Grant?
Do you see a point where HTML5 will replace all these different operating system apps, or is this the trajectory that these operating systems?
I don't think we'll ever see that. I think HTML is emerging as something. So let me talk a little bit about Flash first, because this ties into this. So my company still does Flash, but I personally do just HTML these days. And the reason for that is that my focus in my company is basically R&D and sort of steering the future path of where we're going. And a big part of the reason that I started doing just HTML is that I looked at Flash and I started asking myself the question, when new devices come out, are they going to support Flash? And 2 years ago, the answer to that was sort of a resounding maybe. I don't know. And even at that time, and even more so now, when you look at HTML and you ask that same question, the answer is absolutely yes. Every new device, every new operating system that comes out, it's one of its top priorities is going to be supporting web standards as best as it possibly can, as performantly as it possibly can. But it's still this huge abstraction, right? It's never going to be as agile as native applications. It's never going to be as performant as native applications. And obviously, it's never going to have as good of native feel as native applications. So I don't think, at least in the next 5 years, you're going to see any point where native applications become obsolete, right? I think I'm really interested, and I'm not saying this just because Microsoft is a client, but I'm really interested in seeing where Windows 8 goes, because they've chosen to like make HTML5 a native citizen on the OS, and that's a really big gamble, and it'll really pave the way for other groups to do similar things. But you're still like, if you want the best possible experience on a Windows 8 application, you're still going to build it natively, right? So there's always going to be room for native applications, and I think the best apps on most platforms are going to continue to be native applications. But there's a huge advantage to being able to build something once and with minor tweaking and updates be able to deploy it across all these different platforms. So I think it'll like continue to grow, but I don't think it'll ever supplant native.